Welcome to the Eyes Up Mindset podcast, where we explore what it means to grow daily and find our best in every aspect of life.
Welcome back to another episode of the Eyes Up Mindset podcast. Another amazing episode coming at you right now. Jamie Wagner, good to see you.
John Shirky, you didn't introduce yourself. Everybody, that's John Shirky. He's your host. It's good to see you as well. This opportunity never ceases to amaze me. I told our guest this after we interviewed her, that I didn't know anything about what she does, this sport called ski mountaineering, or Skimo, if you are in the know. I knew nothing about it until I got an email that said she was going to be on the podcast from you. And then I did a me thing and I kind of nerded out on it, and it's pretty incredible,
Well, I only knew a little bit about it, Jamie, because I used to live in Colorado. I have an adjacent understanding of what the sport is. But when I saw what she was attempting to do, which was break a world record, and I was just compelled to reach out to her and say, hey, I want to talk to you about this, because this is what we are about, is having conversations with people that are willing to push themselves to the limit and figure out, where they fall after that.
Well, and the crazy part about it is she's 19, right? She's a 19-year-old that said, I'm going to do this big audacious thing that is go and chase a world record. And yeah, didn't get there, fell a little bit short, but as she mentions in the conversation, like, what an incredible journey, what an incredible opportunity to do this thing, to take that risk, to see that thing up close and personal, and know I pushed myself to that limit, and I'm grateful I did, even though it might mean a few days on the couch and not being able to eat and things like that.
So we got an opportunity to talk with Grace Staberg today. U.S. national Skimo team, competes all over the world. She attempted to break a 24-hour record, Jamie, where she was skiing up and down a mountain for 24 hours straight to see how many vertical feet she could cover in that period. What you talk about, an incredible goal, like, that's insane.
58,000 feet roughly was what she was aiming to do. That's Everest twice, right? I mean, when we think about it like that.
In 24
hours. Yeah. Ski up Everest twice in 24 hours. Now, admittedly, altitude's different and all those things, and the conditions are different, but I don't care who you are. An incredible thing to chase. And
well, but you say altitude's different, but actually, we didn't even ask her about this. But one of the things that she talked about in some of the media coverage was that she wanted to do it in her hometown.
Yeah.
Like, she could have done it at a lower elevation and maybe broken the record, because, there was an impact on her ability to perform at a higher altitude, because she attempted at Copper Mountain, which in Colorado, which is pretty high comparatively to what other records have been set at. But again, we're going to get into the community part of it, the accountability. What an impressive young woman. I don't know. You got anything else? Otherwise, this is just an incredible conversation.
No, I'm incredibly grateful she joined us, obviously, and as I am with all of our guests. But to learn about something new is like, just gives me excitement. And if you're just completely clueless about what we're talking about, go check it out, because it's kind of sweet. So,
Grace Staberg. Grace, welcome to the Eyes Up Mindset podcast. Both Jamie and I are beyond excited to have this conversation with you today. He told you right before we hit record that we've spent the last few days being inspired by you and the accomplishments that you've taken on and attempted, and not always accomplished, but the way that you've responded to all of those things. Grace, sorry, I'm just talking. I told you I talked too much. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
So recently you attempted to break a world record in the vertical ascent over the course of 24 hours, I believe. You climbed 56,000 feet.
Jamie, let's go back. Let's get a little foundation of what
Sure.
that even. Grace, tell us your sport that this one that you were competing in, trying to break this record.
Yeah. So it's the sport of ski mountaineering, or I think it's probably more appropriately called skimo racing. Ski mountaineering, I think, is generally associated a bit more with like big objectives and big peaks. So yeah, essentially it's like backcountry touring on steroids. You put skins on your skis and you ascend and then descend as quickly as you can. So um, yeah, it's a great mix of like endurance sports like running or cycling and downhill skiing, which I think we can all agree is pretty fun.
So I told you I lived in Summit County for a few years, and I actually have a skin set up, and I actually just got a new one because I wasn't fast enough, which has nothing to do with my setup, more my lack of cardio and technique. But um, for those of you out there, when she says skins, I describe it to my family, Grace, as skiing uphill, and they look at me and they're like, "What are you talking about? Like, what are you doing? Why would anyone decide that I'm gonna instead of go the easy way down this mountain, that there are things that take me to the top and then I come down? Why would someone in their right mind decide they're going to try to ski up a mountain?"
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think sports like Skimo, or I think you could compare it to like ultra running or endurance cycling even. I think you definitely have to have a little bit, I don't know, we maybe all are all a little bit off somehow. And we find joy in the suffering, but I also think it does like, I mean, at least personally, I think it allows me to see things that I would otherwise never see. Like, for example, the sunrise in the morning at the ski resort. If you're skiing lifts, you would never have the opportunity to see that. And I think those like really cold, beautiful winter mornings have become one of my favorite things that I just had never experienced before. So I do think that even though there is a lot of like hard work involved, there's also a lot of just like really beautiful views and really fun skiing.
Let's clarify for a second. You said there's a lot of hard work involved. Like, this is what you do is a little bit of insanity. Can we admit this?
I think we could admit that. Yes. I think you have to have some affinity for suffering.
I love that you say that, because I have coached some running, and our listeners know that, and I really have an affinity for runners generally, because I think there is this thing where I'm okay with feeling terrible right now. What do you do in those moments when you get to that brink of, I don't know that I can continue? Part of it is you've just trained it. You've trained that limit so frequently. You're like, I can go through this. But when it's really hard, where do you go?
Yeah. I think honestly, normally I just start imagining the end. I think I have maybe been doing it for long enough now that I know that at the end, I'm going to be really satisfied and I'm going to be really happy that I finished. Um, so I think going to that place and like imagining that satisfaction really helps me to get through. Yeah, I would say that's the biggest thing. I think I don't necessarily go to like a happy place per se, but I think imagining the end, yeah. Or like if it's really hard, like in races, sometimes I imagine like collapsing at the end and I just start to like really fixate on being able to lie down on the snow. And sometimes that helps if it's getting really painful.
That's incredible. How did you find out that you could do this? Like, where did this journey begin? We talk a lot about Eyes Up Mindset, about this thing being a journey and a process, and like loving the process. Where
Mhm.
does your journey into Skimo and endurance events? Because you run ultras also, right? You run ultra marathons.
I do.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
again, how does this start?
Yeah. So I know we said we were maybe going to talk about this, maybe not, but now it's very relevant. So
Yeah.
I had struggled with an eating disorder in middle school. I was running cross country. And that was kind of like what had triggered that originally. And so when I was in recovery from my eating disorder, running, I really wanted to get back to running, but it seemed like it maybe wasn't like the healthiest reintroduction into sport. Um, And so I had looked into like Nordic skiing, or I wanted something that was a little bit more endurance based because I had been doing big mountain that year, and I just am not courageous enough to like huck it off of big cliffs. And so it wasn't the best fit. And I am really good friends with a bunch of Nordic skiers, but there's just so much like skill and technique involved. And I was already in high school, so I was worried that I wouldn't be able to pick up on it fast enough. And the coach who had been coaching me in running before was starting a youth Skimo program. So I signed up like not knowing what the sport was. I was one of those people who was like, what is skiing uphill? What is a skin? What is a touring ski? I had no idea what any of it was. Yeah, so that was kind of where it started for me. And the first year I definitely was not fast. I definitely was not in good shape. That year there were a lot of really painful days trying to get into shape. Yeah, so that was kind of where it all started for me, and then yeah, just continued from there the next few years.
So that's a relatively humble start, I would say, to where you are now. And so at what point did you know, boy, I might be pretty good at this, or this might be something that I want to devote kind of all my effort into being the best that I can be?
Yeah, I would say like, so the first half of the first year, I think I had no aspirations whatsoever. Like I would get dropped in the warm up. I could not, yeah, I like couldn't even keep up when the rest of my team was going super easy. So I think for the first half of the first year, I didn't even want to win like a local race. And then later on that year, I ended up winning like a more regional level race, I guess. So I think that race was probably where I was like, oh, maybe I could be okay at this. But I didn't really start like sacrificing much until I went to World Championships 2 years later. And I got, I think, seventh place, ninth place, and something in the teens, like 13th or something, which wasn't great, but that was kind of what like lit a fire under me to see what I could do on a really competitive level. So it definitely took a few years of like building a base, and yeah, just being patient with that.
I'm curious. I'd come out to visit John a few times when he lived out in Summit. And, I know that he worked with some athletes that are doing incredible things in ski and snowboard and just these amazing young people that push
Mhm.
the boundaries of possible regularly. How do you think you talked about like going to the world championships and seeing that something was possible, right? I can go and place,
Mhm.
at a pretty high level. Um, and then you're around all these people all the time that are also pushing the boundaries of what's possible for people your age, quote unquote, right?
Mhm.
How does that contribute to your belief in yourself or your thoughts about I can do this thing because all these other people around me are doing it too?
Yeah, I definitely think it, yeah, contributes a lot. I think I've had it on, yeah, on various levels, probably like athletes my own age at the World Cup level, I think are really inspiring, and they definitely instill some of that in me. I think especially just like in looking at the sacrifice side of it, maybe like in seeing that they also don't party until 4 a.m. on a regular basis, or I think for sure they inspire me. And I also think in Summit County, there's just such a huge group of like parents or people in their mid 30s who have full-time jobs and have kids and all of this stuff going on. And if you saw them in a crowd, or even if you were talking with them, like you would never pick up on how amazing they are. But they're just like incredible athletes, and they're maybe not even competing, but they're just so strong and so humble. So I also think that group, especially in Summit County, is really encouraging and has been a big part of my motivation and my own development of self-belief.
So I want to go back, Grace, if you would, with us to the World Championships, because I think you had something happen there that you had to overcome, correct? In terms that you had you were penalized time, right, for something, and so this is coming. I know parts of this story, and I want you to tell it because I'll screw it up. But so just tell us about your world championship experience, and maybe we'll go from there.
Yeah. So actually, so at World Championships 2 years ago, well, now it was 3 years ago, I guess. I wasn't all that fast. And then I was penalized at Youth Olympics, which was just last year.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think it maybe would have been a little bit less devastating had it been at World Championships my first year, because I think I went into that race with no expectations. Like I just wanted to see how I stacked up against the Europeans. But then at Youth Olympics last year, going into that race, I had already stood on the podium at the World Cup, and I had already won then a World Cup just a few weeks prior. So I definitely, put a lot of pressure on myself, and I felt like people were expecting a lot of me. And I also was just really proud of my race. I generally am not that good about coming up from behind. I tend to like being in the front and just holding people off. But that day I really took a leap with myself on the last climb, and I really left it all out there. And I ended up passing 3 people on the last climb, and then I finished in third. So I think just the fact that I was really proud of that race, and I had kind of lived up to the expectation I put on myself, made it really hard to kind of wrap my head around my penalty in the end. But it's a good learning experience. It's definitely made me a little bit better at handling it when I fall short of my own expectations.
Speak to that a little bit regarding the world record attempt. You go out a few weeks ago in an attempt to break that 58,000 foot mark to set a world record in that vertical ascent. And we didn't quite get there, but you still set a North American record and did something incredible. You spend 24 hours skiing. What was that like to go out and do that, to have that experience, and then to still fall a little bit short of what the desired outcome was?
Yeah. Honestly, it was an amazing experience. I think I was just so overwhelmed with gratitude, like the week leading up to it and during and the week after. I mean, the community here really, really showed up for me, and I had somebody skiing with me at all times. And I just, I never could have imagined that level of support. And it was amazing being able to do that and being able to pull the community together for the effort. So I was really overwhelmed by it, and just honestly so grateful. So I think that I probably honestly I think I feel the same way I do now if I would have broken the record. I think I knew it was a really ambitious goal. And I've never done anything nearly that long. So I had absolutely no idea what to expect. And I think in races, it's easy to look for little things that you could have done better. And it's easy to be disappointed if you fall short because you think there's something you could have done better. At least for me, I have that happen frequently. But with the 24-hour attempt, I think I really gave it my all. And I mean, I pretty much laid on the couch for 4 days after. I couldn't eat. I had to start using an inhaler for the first time in my life. And I think that was a really clear sign to me that I gave it absolutely everything I had. And so in the end, I think I'm really at peace with the fact that I didn't break the record. And I thought I would be more disappointed if I fell short. And in the end, I'm mostly just really overwhelmed with gratitude for my community and really happy to have given it my all.
And I think, Grace, that speaks to a maturity and a mindset that you bring to the table. And one of the reasons that we were so interested to talk with you is that it's not about the result, right? It's not about getting to 58,000. It's about setting a goal, and I'm going to read, I just have this quote from your Instagram, and it was before the race. And you said, I'm doing something in a week from now that borders on absolutely terrifying. Okay. But it's exciting to set a goal that I'll have to give everything that I have to even come close to achieving it. I think so many people don't set goals like that, right? They set goals that are maybe a little bit hard for them or probably attainable. But in the end, that goal for you wasn't about, I mean, yes, you wanted to break the record, but when you look back at it, it's like the whole point is, can I put myself out there to see what I have, to test the limit, and then the chips are going to fall where they fall at the end, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think beforehand I had to really come to peace with the fact that it just was going to be what it was going to be. That definitely was the first goal I've set that was that far out there. And yeah, I mean, I think it's understandable that lots of times people maybe shy away from doing that. It's definitely scary to set goals that you're pretty likely not to achieve. And I definitely think I struggled with that. I think it would have been really easy for me to just go out and ski for 24 hours, mostly on my own. And if I did well, I could have shared it on social media. And if I didn't break the record, then nobody had to even know that I went for it. But yeah, I think setting really big goals pushes us to be a lot better than just setting goals that we're likely to achieve.
What an amazing perspective, right? And I said this to John right before you came on. I don't think you can achieve the types of things that we're talking about in any sport, in anything, without having this amazing perspective that it's kind of all a gift, right? Mm-hmm. It's all a gift that is not guaranteed tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And where did that come from? How have you instilled that kind of process? Because you talk about, I could have gone and done it and nobody could have known, and it wouldn't have been the risk that we're talking about because my community wouldn't have showed up and all these sort of things. Like, mm-hmm. But you said, no, I'm going to do it differently. I'm going to put myself out there because I know that there's going to be some accountability in it and all these other things. But where does that come from? Where does that perspective, that maturity come from?
I mean, I think the biggest thing is probably just that I have really great role models. I think I have a lot of really strong women, well, and men in my life who I look up to and who I have seen go out and do really big things, and handle their own failures with grace. Yeah. And I think maybe that's even the bigger part of it. Like, I think seeing people I look up to fail in goals they set and handle them so humbly and grow from it and not like wallow in it. I think that really helped me just in seeing that, like, even if I didn't achieve, I was going to be totally fine. Because I think we all see people who do achieve big goals. And I think we all would like to know what that feels like, but I think maybe we don't always see people failing. And so I think lots of times, at least personally, lots of times I've been afraid of that just because I'm afraid of disappointing myself or afraid of disappointing others. And I think seeing people you look up to fall short of their own goals, and just go on with life is helpful. Because we don't achieve everything we set out to do. And in the end, life goes on and hopefully we grow from it.
Well, and some people try to fake it, right? And say, I mean, you're talking about seeing people fail and them either acknowledging it or allowing you to see them in that vulnerable state, right? There's a lot of people that don't even let themselves, or they try not to let other people see that. So that's a really cool thing that you have been gifted in your life. I want to go to the record attempt I got to imagine there was at least one point where you're like, what am I doing out here? What am I trying to, like, physically, mentally, so take us to that point where it's like, what in the world am I doing right now? And I could quit and I could go home and lay on the couch for the next 4 days and I'm still going to have accomplished more than most people today. But you continued to go through that. So take us to that moment and maybe what you used to get yourself through that.
Yeah. I think the nighttime, like the early night, was actually the hardest for me. People had warned me about like the 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. hours. So I didn't really expect myself to have a really tough time before then. Um, but I'm normally up skiing or running around 3. So that time of day was actually easier for me. And like 9 to 11 p.m. was really hard for me because I like going to bed early and generally I'm getting in bed at 9. Um, and yeah, at that point I was only halfway done. So I think that was a really daunting thought, like, oh, I'm exhausted and I still have to do this a whole nother time. Um, so I would say that was probably the biggest moment I questioned what I was doing just because there was still a lot to do. Um, but I think just knowing, I think the biggest thing that kept me going was knowing that people were going to be there in the morning to ski with me. And yeah, just knowing that I had people coming in the morning, I knew that I couldn't quit before they came. And I think quitting was never really an option for me. Like I had talked with my parents beforehand and they were like, we want to make sure that if you're really like injured or something, you'll stop. And um, I had pretty much settled on the fact that if I was like seriously injured or I was going to make something worse, I would stop. But short of that, I wasn't going to stop. And I think just deciding that beforehand was really helpful because I didn't give myself any outs, and neither did anyone else. Like I think if my crew would have been telling me like, oh, you can stop now at 9 p.m., it could have gone awry. But everyone was warned not to give me any outs, and that was really helpful.
This is the second allusion you've made to community. And I watched, so if anybody is still unfamiliar with what Skimo is and wants to get a little check on it, go to your webpage, gracestaberg.com, and just check out some of your blog posts. But also there's a link to a video, which is a documentary called The Sisters of Skimo. And in that you have a quote that says, having a sense of community makes you a better athlete. Where you talked about having these role models and these people that you look up to, demonstrating that willingness to fail, having this community around you that said, like, they're going to show up for me at 4 a.m. and they're going to ski with me. How has that feeling of community enabled you to be a better athlete? Referring to your quote, how does that help you?
Yeah, I mean, I really think I would credit it in large part to all of my successes. I think that when we have a community that includes people that we look up to and that we train with, I think personally it really helps me hold myself accountable. And I want to make myself proud and my family proud, but I also want to make my whole community proud because they're the ones who taught me this sport and who have kept me in this sport. So I think like it plays a big part in my motivation. And I mean, also just the obvious, like my community, I have people in Summit who I've trained with since I very first started this sport. And I think having training partners is so essential, especially training partners who you really get along with well and really look up to. Yeah, so I think my community is, yeah, part of my motivation and part of like my actual development as an athlete.
Can you speak to the dynamic of that a little bit? I think, like as a runner, one of the things that I loved about long runs, and when I say long runs, I'm talking about like 6 miles, right? I'm not in this 50-mile place where you are. But is that connection, right? That place of connection where you're talking about the things that don't come up randomly, right? What does that dynamic look like when somebody's struggling? How do you help them? How do they help you? I don't know. It's just such a curious thing to me.
Yeah. I mean, I first off would definitely agree. I think I've had some of my favorite conversations in the middle of long skis or long runs, just because I think, yeah, I mean, if you've been skiing for like 12 hours, you don't have much of a filter left anymore. And I think that's the important part, because I think then when you do see somebody like at their worst in training, I think it brings you really close together. And I think it makes the community feel just so close knit. Like I know so many of these people I could go to with any issue, and they would be more than happy to help me, and they would be there to support me in any way they can. Just because I think it's hard not to be that close if you're used to supporting people in really tough moments athletically. You get used to doing that in life too.
So I'm gonna jump back into the eating disorder conversation, because I think there's just a good segue in there. Is you talk about that now, that it's easy to go to them, it's easy to see them at their worst. Like, why? Because you said you struggled with it for 3 years, right? Like that was
Yeah.
a process. Like, where in there did it feel like you couldn't go to someone?
It was a fairly large chunk of that time.
Yeah.
I was really grateful. I still am really grateful that I first struggled with my eating disorder when I was a kid, because my parents were the ones who put me in treatment. I didn't really open up about it. There were very few people who knew about it, and we were still living in Denver at the time. So it was a slightly different community. And then so then we moved up here, and the first, I guess, 2 years that we were living up here, I was still in recovery. And so it definitely took me a long time to open up about it. And yeah, honestly, I didn't really speak with people about it while I was still struggling with it. It wasn't really until afterwards that I felt comfortable opening up about it, which looking back is a shame, because I know that if I would have told anyone in the community up here, they would have, supported me however they could have. But I think that was hard for me to see in the moment.
No question. Yeah. Sorry, John, you can go ahead if you have something. I feel like I'd monopolized the last 10 minutes.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay. It's our usual dynamic, Grace. I have a few questions and Jamie has a lot of questions, but
It's perfect.
oh yeah, no, thank you. Grace, I can't tell you, I started the interview or the conversation telling you how inspired we are by you. And I'm even more impressed having gotten to talk to you and to hear you speak to the skills that you have, the experiences, and then to give credit a large part to community and people around you. And I think it's an incredible example. I'm excited to share your story. We're super big fans of yours now, and we wish you the best of luck in the next. When's the next race or the next event or the next thing?
I'm not actually racing until the first week of August, so I have a lot of time to just train now.
What does that look like? What's your time commitment day to day, or are you kind of in more of an ebb state right now because you just came off of quite a bit of competition? Or
Yeah, so the past 2 weeks I've done like a little off season, if you will. I just trained I did what I wanted to. I didn't have structured training. And then throughout the summer, I block my training weekly. So normally I do like 25 to 30 hours of training in a week. And it's, pretty consistent throughout the summer. So it's definitely a big time commitment, but I mean, I would count myself as very lucky to just be able to run and bike all day in the summer. So definitely not complaining.
Well, I think the last thing I want to finish with is, so our tagline is live eyes up and eyes up mindset. And I told you it's a little bit about overcoming barriers, not having excuses, focusing on growth rather than outcomes. And the quote from you, and I just like, it almost brings me to tears, Grace, and it's on your Instagram. It says, all that's left to do, and this was prior, all that's left to do is go uphill relatively fast for a pretty long time, which I think is pretty relative. But I'm going to do the best that I can with a smile, with a full heart, because most of this effort reminds me of the privilege that I have to move through the mountains and the wonderful people the sport has brought into my life. That is an incredible statement by someone who, again, is so impressive. Grace, thank you for giving us your time and sharing your story with us.
Of course. Thank you guys so much for having me.
Thanks again to Grace for joining us. And sharing her story, her tools, her wisdom, her perspective. Jamie, perspective is something that kind of kept coming up over and over and over. We talk about being able to zoom in and zoom out and see the whole picture in things. And boy, I don't remember an interview we've done lately that made me think and feel the way that she just did.
Yeah. And honestly, that zoom in perspective, right? That I'm doing this task that may challenge me to a level that I've never felt before. And being aware of that, right? Knowing fully well yourself to the level where you can say, this thing is going to stress me in a way that I can't fathom, but I'm still going to walk through the door. And then to be, when it's done, to zoom out enough to say, you know what? I don't really care that much that I fell short, but I'm so grateful for the people that showed up for me and for the opportunity to do this thing, which when you say that, like that it's an opportunity to push yourself to a place where you now have to use an inhaler for the first time in your life. Like you stress your body to that level is perspective in and of itself.
Yeah, well, and how many of us go through life and we don't think of going to work as an opportunity to measure our output, our effort, right? And yes, we do in terms of making money and impacting people's lives sometimes, but like, man, being grateful for, I mean, she talks about joy in the suffering, which it doesn't always have to be suffering, right? It doesn't always have to be physical pain, but find joy. Be grateful for the opportunity that you have to go out and do whatever it is that you do, right? We were talking beforehand because when we were researching, it just made us think of our head football coach. He tells a story about his dad growing up in Chicago. And he said, happy as a man with a grateful heart is something that is just emblazoned in our souls from that experience. But he talked about his dad going to McDonald's and being like the most excited person about ordering a Big Mac. Like, man, I can't wait to get this Big Mac, and it's like, it's a Big Mac. You can get one on every corner in every major city everywhere. And he was so grateful for that little thing. And that, that was how I felt talking with Grace, was she's just like, man, I'm just grateful for the opportunity.
Well, and I get to see a sunset. I get to see a sunrise. Like I get to see these things in places that I just wouldn't have been if I'd have taken the chairlift. Right. And I think that is the challenge for me from her conversation is what things do we take for granted? It doesn't have to be the suffering, right? The other takeaway is when you push yourself to suffering, you find things, right? You find things to be grateful for. You find things to notice that you didn't notice before. Like it takes away the blinders and it makes us focus in. And one of the things that comes of it is incredible gratitude. But like, where are we ignoring these places that could be huge blessings in our life, huge benefits to our life? And how do we take control of those things? How do we, or give up control of those things? It might be different for each one of us,
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us today. Do us a favor, spread the word. Give it to somebody that you care about, because this message from Grace today is powerful and it could change someone's life. It can change your life. Jamie, the last thing, one of the last things she told me, or she said, was, I just wanted to be proud of the race. Like the outcome didn't really matter. At the end of the day, I was proud of the race that I ran. What if that's how we lived every day? At the end of the day, you could say, man, I was proud of the life that I lived today. I was proud of the race today. And as always, live eyes up.